Her fingers dug into my arm as we stood at the mountain's edge. "Just one more step, Mom," she whispered, her smile tight and strange. The next moment, a violent shove sent me stumbling, my feet scraping against the rocks. Wind roared in my ears, the valley spinning beneath me. I clawed at empty air, my hand catching on a root as my body dangled above certain death. Why would my only daughter do this to me? Was money worth more than blood? And how could a mother's love survive such betrayal? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I never thought that the deepest wound of my life would come, not from the world outside, but from the very child I carried and raised with every breath of my being. My name is Margaret Turner. I am 72 years old, a widow, and I have lived in Asheville, North Carolina, for most of my life. People know this town for its mountains, its golden leaves in autumn, and its quiet charm. For me, though, Asheville is the place where I built a life with my husband, raised my daughter Linda, and dreamed of growing old surrounded by family. I lost my husband more than 10 years ago. He was a carpenter, a man of few words but steady hands. After his passing, the house felt too large, the nights too long. Linda was all I had left. She was my only child, the little girl I had once rocked to sleep while whispering lullabies. She had been bright, curious, and tender-hearted as a child. I believed that no matter what happened in this world, she would always stand by me as I had stood by her. Life, however, has a way of testing the strongest faith. I still remember the day Linda came home in tears, confessing that she was buried in debt. She had fallen in love with a man named Daniel Hayes, and the two of them lived a life far beyond their means. Fancy restaurants, nights at casinos, endless shopping. At first, I tried to help her in small ways, paying her rent when she fell behind, giving her grocery money. But the hole was deeper than I could ever fill. I told myself it was only a phase, that she would eventually grow tired of that reckless life and return to the simple values she was raised with. Still, I never stopped worrying. That is what mothers do. Even when their children stumble, they reach out a hand to steady them. Years before, after my husband passed, I had taken out a life insurance policy. It was not for me, it never was. I thought of Linda. If something happened to me, I wanted her to have something secure, a cushion that could keep her from despair. I paid the premiums faithfully, even when money was tight. It was my way of protecting her long after I was gone. I never imagined that the very thing meant to safeguard her future could become the shadow hanging over my life. Linda began asking me strange questions, her eyes darting nervously as though she carried a secret. "Mom," she said one evening, her voice oddly casual, "that insurance policy of yours, it's worth a lot, isn't it?" I laughed softly, brushing it aside. "It's enough to take care of you when I'm not here anymore. That's all you need to know." But she pressed further. "I mean, how much exactly? Don't you think it's kind of wasted if you live another 20 years? You hardly spend money on yourself." Her words pierced me like a needle. Wasted, as if my very existence beyond today was an inconvenience. I looked into her eyes, searching for the little girl I once knew, but her face was hardened, almost desperate. I tried to ignore the unease, telling myself it was just the stress of her debt speaking. Yet deep inside, something felt wrong. A quiet warning whispered through my bones. A week later, Linda suggested we take a trip together. "It'll be good for us, Mom," she insisted. "Just you and me, a drive up into the mountains like old times." The idea stirred a flicker of warmth in me. Maybe she wanted to reconnect, to find again what we had lost along the way. Despite my doubts, I agreed. Perhaps I wanted so badly to believe in her that I ignored the darkness I sensed. That Saturday, the air was crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. We drove up the Blue Ridge Parkway, winding roads bordered by fiery reds and deep golds. The mountains stretched wide, silent witnesses to our journey. Linda talked more than usual, her voice carrying a strange brightness that felt rehearsed. I told myself it was a good sign. She was trying. When we stopped at an overlook, the valley spread out below us, breathtaking in its vastness. I stood at the railing, taking it all in, the cool wind brushing my cheeks. Linda stood beside me, her arm brushing mine. For a moment, I felt safe again, as though the years had rolled back and she was still my little girl. But then, something shifted. Her hand pressed against my back, too firm, too sudden. Before I could make sense of it, my feet slipped. The world tilted. I was falling. The roar of the wind swallowed my scream. Rocks and branches blurred past as the earth rushed toward me. In that split second, my heart shattered not from the fall, but from the certainty that the push had not been an accident. It had come from my daughter, my own flesh and blood. Darkness closed in. The air rushed past my ears with a deafening roar, and my heart thudded as if it would burst. I remember clawing at empty space, desperate to grasp something, anything that might stop the fall. By some miracle, my hand snagged a thick root jutting out from the rock face. Pain shot through my arm as my shoulder nearly wrenched from its socket. But I held on with every ounce of strength I had left. Below me, the ravine plunged into darkness, jagged rocks waiting like teeth. Above me, the world looked impossibly far. For a few seconds, I dangled there, gasping for air, my chest burning, my body trembling. I tried to call out, but my voice was hoarse and broken. And then I looked up. Linda was still at the top, standing by the railing. She wasn't screaming, wasn't reaching down to help. She was frozen, staring at me with wide eyes. In that moment, I wanted to believe she was shocked, horrified by what had happened. But then, she did something I will never forget. She turned away. My daughter walked back to the car, her shoulders rigid, her steps quick. No frantic calls for help, no desperate rush to save me, just silence as she left me hanging there, clinging to life by the strength of an old woman's hand. The betrayal was worse than the fall itself. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to pull myself upward. Every movement sent searing pain through my ribs and legs. I had no idea how long I could hold on. My mind spun with memories of the past. Linda's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, the way she used to run into my arms after school, the nights I stayed up sewing her dresses so she could feel special at Sunday service. How could that same little girl, my very heart, walk away while I dangled between life and death? My strength was fading when I heard voices. 2 hikers appeared on the trail above, their boots crunching against gravel. At first, I thought it was a cruel trick of my mind, but then one of them shouted, "Oh my God, hold on!" A rope was quickly lowered, and with their help, I was pulled back up to solid ground. My body collapsed against the earth, bruised, bleeding, and trembling. The men knelt beside me, asking if I could breathe, if I could stand. My lips formed words, but they came out fractured. My daughter. She pushed me. They exchanged glances, confusion flickering in their eyes. One of them, a younger man with a kind face, pulled out his phone. "We'll call 911. Just stay with us, ma'am." The world blurred in and out as sirens echoed in the distance. The next thing I remember clearly was the harsh white light of the hospital, the steady beeping of machines, and the ache of bandages wrapped tight around my body. A nurse leaned over me, her voice soft but firm. "You're very lucky, Mrs. Turner. Another few minutes and it might have been too late. You've got some cracked ribs and a nasty concussion, but you're alive." Alive. The word felt heavy, almost unreal. For days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes I dreamed of my husband, standing tall in his work clothes, reaching out to me. Other times, I dreamed of Linda as a child, her laugh ringing like bells. But every time I woke, reality pressed down like a stone. My own daughter had tried to end my life. When the sheriff arrived, I felt my heart tighten. Robert Miller had been a family friend for decades. He had known my husband, had come to our house for Sunday dinners more than once. His face was older now, lines etched deep around his eyes, but his voice carried the same calm authority. "Margaret," he said gently, pulling up a chair, "can you tell me what happened up there on the mountain?" I hesitated. The words caught in my throat. To accuse my only daughter, it felt like tearing my own soul apart. But his eyes waited, steady, patient, demanding truth. "She pushed me," I whispered. "Linda, my Linda pushed me off the overlook." End quote. He didn't flinch, didn't write it off as confusion from my injuries. Instead, he leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Do you believe she meant to?" I closed my eyes. The image of her turning away burned in my mind. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy. At last, he nodded slowly. "I'll look into it, but I'll need your help. And you need to be sure you're ready for what that means." What it meant was simple but unbearable. If I pursued this, Linda could face prison, disgrace, a life destroyed. If I stayed silent, she would walk free, carrying her secrets into tomorrow. As the days stretched on, visitors came. Helen, my neighbor, arrived with a basket of fruit and tears in her eyes. She held my hand and whispered, "I never trusted that man of hers. I saw them one evening, whispering near your porch. They stopped when they noticed me. Something wasn't right." And her words sent a shiver down my spine. Could she have heard part of the plan? Was this the piece that tied everything together? But even as I pieced the truth, my heart wavered. Every time I thought of Linda, I saw the baby I once carried, not the woman who had betrayed me. How do you turn against your own flesh and blood, even when they have already turned against you? I didn't know the answer yet. All I knew was that I had survived the fall, and perhaps, for reasons beyond my understanding, I was meant to. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady hum of machines. I sat propped against pillows, my ribs aching with every breath. Outside the window, autumn leaves swirled in the breeze, dancing like flames before settling on the ground. I often stared at them, losing myself in their gentle fall, as though they could erase the memory of my own. But nothing erased it. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's back as she walked away from me on that overlook. Helen visited me almost every day. She brought soup in glass jars, pressed my hands between hers, and talked in her warm, no-nonsense way. One afternoon, she leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Margaret, I didn't want to say this at first. I thought maybe I was mistaken. But I swear to you, I heard Linda and that man of hers, Daniel, one evening last month. They were standing near your porch, whispering. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard your name, and something about insurance." My heart clenched. I swallowed hard, searching her face. "You're certain?" Helen nodded firmly. "I may be old, but my ears still work just fine. And the way they stopped talking the moment they saw me, well, it wasn't the kind of talk meant for daylight." I felt a chill seep into my bones. The suspicion I had tried to push away now stood clear before me. My daughter hadn't acted in a moment of panic or weakness. It had been planned. Sheriff Miller came again, notebook in hand. His presence was steady, a rock in the storm. He asked the same questions in different ways, watching me closely. "Margaret, you've always been a fair woman. Do you believe Linda is capable of something like this?" The question sliced through me. I wanted to shout no, to protect her, to cling to the image of the girl I once cradled. But the truth was a shadow that wouldn't leave. I whispered, "Yes." His eyes softened, but his jaw stayed set. "If we're going to pursue this, we'll need evidence. Witnesses, records, anything that ties her to the intent. Right now, all we have is your word. That matters, but in court, it may not be enough." Helen's words echoed in my mind. Perhaps she could be that witness. Yet even as I considered it, a war raged within me. At night, alone in the sterile quiet of the hospital, I thought of Linda. I remembered her first steps across our wooden floor, her laughter at the county fair, the way she clung to me when storms rattled the windows. Where had that child gone? Had I failed her somehow? Was this my punishment for mistakes I never knew I made? The doctors wanted to keep me under observation for a few more days. My body was weak, but my mind was restless. I felt caged, powerless. And yet, beneath the sorrow, a new spark began to stir a stubborn will. I had survived the fall for a reason. Perhaps God himself had held me to that route, sparing me for a purpose. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Helen returned. She carried a small envelope. "I didn't know if I should give you this," she said, glancing around nervously. "But I thought you needed to see it." Inside were photographs, blurry, taken from across the street, but clear enough to recognize. Linda and Daniel, standing close together outside a bar downtown. Their faces were tense, their hands gesturing sharply. Helen explained. A friend of mine works at the diner across from that bar. She snapped these one night because Daniel caused a scene. She thought I'd want them. I didn't think much of it until now. My hands trembled as I held the pictures. Proof, not of the push, but of their closeness, their secret dealings. It was a thread Sheriff Miller could tug on. That night, sleep refused to come. I stared at the ceiling, torn in two. To give these to the sheriff meant stepping onto a path I could never turn back from. Linda would face shame, perhaps prison. My daughter, my only child. But if I stayed silent, what then? She would walk free, believing she had succeeded. Perhaps next time she wouldn't leave me hanging from a root. Perhaps she would finish what she started. The thought sent a wave of steel through me. I could not let it happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. The next morning, when Sheriff Miller returned, I handed him the envelope. My voice was steady, though my heart ached. You need to see this, and Helen can tell you what she heard. I won't hide it anymore. He accepted it with a solemn nod. This won't be easy, Margaret, but you've done the right thing. House at 2. As he left, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time since the fall, I felt something like strength returning. I was no longer just the victim of a terrible betrayal. I was a mother who had survived, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Still, deep in my heart, a question remained, gnawing like a wound that refused to heal. Could I truly stand against my own daughter, or was there still a way to save her from herself? I didn't yet know the answer, but the road ahead would force me to choose. The days following my decision felt like walking on a narrow bridge, each step heavy with fear and guilt. The photographs, the whispered conversations Helen overheard, my own memory of Linda's hand against my back, all of it now rested in the sheriff's care. Yet even as the pieces lined up, a part of me clung to hope that it was all some terrible misunderstanding. I wanted to believe my daughter had faltered, not fallen completely into darkness. Sheriff Miller came to see me again, his presence filling the small hospital room. He placed his hat on the windowsill and spoke in that slow, deliberate manner of his. Margaret, we've been looking into Daniel Hayes. He's got a history, gambling debts, bar fights, small-time scams. Nothing big enough to put him away, but enough to paint a picture. He's trouble, plain and simple. My chest tightened. And Linda? He hesitated, his eyes narrowing. We don't have much on her. Not yet, but we know she was with him the night before your accident. Bank records show withdrawals, large ones for cash that doesn't line up with her income. It's possible she's helping to cover his debts. Hearing it said aloud was like swallowing glass. My Linda, caught in the orbit of a man who dragged her into ruin. But still, the push from the overlook, it hadn't been his hand. It had been hers. I forced myself to ask, what happens next? We'll start with questions. See if her story matches yours. But Margaret... He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You need to be ready. If she senses we're closing in, she might try to manipulate you. She may even come here. That warning lingered long after he left. And sure enough, the very next evening, Linda appeared. She stepped into my hospital room carrying flowers, sunflowers, bright and bold. She set them by the window, her movements careful, rehearsed. Her smile wavered, not quite reaching her eyes. Mom, she said softly, pulling up a chair. I've been so worried. I can't believe what happened to you. They told me you slipped. Are you okay? Her words stung. She was testing me, I realized, waiting to see what I would say. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. I survived, I said simply. By God's grace and the hands of 2 strangers. Her face twitched just slightly, but enough for me to see the flicker of unease. She reached for my hand, her grip warm but firm, almost too tight. Mom, you don't think I had anything to do with this, do you? You know me better than that. It was the question I had dreaded, placed directly before me. My pulse pounded as I searched her eyes. I saw fear there, but also calculation. She wasn't here out of love. She was here to measure how much I remembered, how much I would confess. I pulled my hand free. I know what I felt, Linda, and I know what I saw. Her breath caught, and for a moment her mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her jaw set. Mom, if you say things like that, people will think you're confused. You've been through a trauma. A fall like that, it can mess with your memory. I almost laughed, though the sound would have been bitter. My body is broken, Linda, but my mind is clear. You pushed me. The silence between us was a living thing, stretching heavy and thick. Finally, she stood, her chair scraping the floor. Her smile returned, brittle as glass. You should rest, Mom. I'll come back when you're feeling better. She left the flowers behind, but their brightness only felt like mockery. Later that night, I told Helen what had happened. Her eyes grew wide, her lips pressing tight. She came here to intimidate you, Helen said. Don't you see? She's scared. That means the sheriff is closing in. Still, my heart ached. I wanted to believe there was some fragment of the girl I loved buried deep inside Linda, crying out for help. But as the days passed, and as whispers of the investigation spread through town, I saw no sign of remorse. One morning, Sheriff Miller returned with updates. He stood at the foot of my bed, his expression grim. We spoke to Linda. She denied everything, of course. Said you must have slipped, but there were inconsistencies. She claimed she called for help, but there are no phone records. Witnesses saw her leave the overlook before the hikers found you. My stomach turned. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but with each piece, my heart fractured further. What about Daniel? I asked. The sheriff's lips thinned. He's harder to pin down. He covers his tracks, avoids banks, lives mostly in cash. But we'll get there. After he left, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My body was healing slowly, but my spirit felt heavier each day. The path ahead was clear. I had to stand firm, to testify, to bring the truth into light. And yet, at night, when the hospital was still and quiet, I prayed for my daughter. I prayed that God would soften her heart, that she would turn from the darkness she had chosen. Because even as I prepared to fight for justice, I remained what I had always been, a mother. And mothers do not stop loving their children, even when those children break their hearts. Recovery was slow. Every morning the nurses coaxed me into sitting up, into walking a few steps down the hallway. My ribs ached, my legs shook, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to grow stronger, not only for my own sake but for what was coming. A storm was gathering around me, and weakness would not carry me through it. Helen continued to visit, her presence a balm against the loneliness. She spoke of ordinary things, the weather, her garden, the neighbor's dog, but her eyes often strayed toward the door, wary, as though expecting Linda to burst in unannounced. She's rattled, Helen said one afternoon. I can feel it. She knows the sheriff's circling. Indeed, word came from Sheriff Miller that Linda had grown restless. He had questioned her twice more, each time finding cracks in her story. She's slippery, he told me, standing at the foot of my hospital bed, his arms folded. But lies have a way of unraveling. It's Daniel I'm watching closely. He's careless. He'll trip before long. That night, I dreamed of the overlook again, the dizzying drop, the sudden push, the desperate grip on the root. I woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air. But beneath the fear was something new. Anger. Not wild, consuming anger, but a steady flame, quiet and controlled. I realized then that survival had given me a gift, the chance to fight back. A few days later, Linda returned. This time she came without flowers, without pretense. She shut the hospital room door behind her, her eyes sharp. Mom, she began, her voice tight. The sheriff's been asking me questions. People are whispering. Do you know what that does to me? To my reputation? I stared at her, forcing myself to remain calm. Your reputation, Linda? You tried to kill me. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. That's not what anyone else believes. You're confused, old, hurt. You'll look like a fragile old woman clinging to wild stories. Do you really want to drag our family name through the mud? My hands trembled, but I steadied them against the blanket. You already dragged it through the mud the moment you put your hands on me. For a moment, fury flashed in her eyes, raw and unmasked. But then, just as quickly, she smoothed it away, her smile returning. Think about it, Mom. Without me, what do you have? No family. No one to take care of you when you're out of here. The cruelty of her words cut deeper than any knife. Yet beneath them, I heard something else. Desperation. She was afraid, cornered. That fear, I realized, was proof that the truth was closing in. After she left, Helen slipped into the room. She had seen Linda storm down the hallway, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. "She's losing control," Helen said. "That's when people make mistakes." And, sure enough, Daniel was the first to falter. A week later, the sheriff returned with news. "We picked him up after a fight outside a bar," Miller explained, his voice grim. "He was drunk, mouthing off about money. One of my deputies overheard him bragging about an insurance payday that didn't go as planned. I felt my heart hammer in my chest. Proof. Not just whispers or suspicions, but a confession, reckless though it was. He didn't name Linda outright," the sheriff continued, "but it's enough to press harder. We're building the case, Margaret. It's coming together." The relief I felt was tangled with sorrow. For every step closer to justice, I felt my daughter slipping further away from me. Still, I knew there was no turning back. That night, as I sat alone in the hospital room, I pulled a small Bible from the drawer beside my bed. It had been my husband's, the leather worn smooth by his hands. I turned the pages slowly until I found the verse he had underlined years ago. "The truth shall set you free." Tears blurred the words, but I clung to them. The truth might destroy my family, but lies had already done enough damage. In the weeks that followed, my body healed little by little. The doctors spoke of releasing me soon. I would return to my home, to the quiet creak of floorboards and the smell of old wood. But home would no longer be the same. It would be the battleground for what was to come. One evening, Helen helped pack the flowers and cards I had received during my stay. She paused, holding up the wilted sunflowers Linda had brought on her first visit. Their once bright faces were drooping, their petals brittle. "Do you want to keep these?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Number. They don't mean what they should." She tossed them into the trash. Watching them fall, I felt a strange sense of closure. The gift had been hollow, just like Linda's words. And yet, as I prepared to leave the hospital behind, I couldn't shake one question that gnawed at me. Would my daughter fight to the bitter end? Or would she finally break under the weight of truth? Either way, the reckoning was coming. The day I left the hospital, the air carried the crisp bite of late autumn. Helen drove me home in her old sedan, the heater rattling but warm. As we turned onto my street, I felt my chest tighten. My little white house stood at the corner, its porch sagging slightly, the wind chimes clinking softly in the breeze. It looked the same as always, yet it no longer felt safe. Helen helped me inside, fussing as she unpacked groceries and fresh linens she had brought. "You'll need someone with you," she said firmly, her hands on her hips. "At least until you're stronger. I don't want you lifting so much as a kettle." I smiled faintly. "You've been more family to me than anyone, Helen." "Oh." Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she busied herself with the kitchen, leaving a pot of stew simmering on the stove. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the ticking of the clock filling the silence. My husband's photograph rested on the mantel, his eyes kind and steady even after all these years. I whispered to him, as I often did when the weight was too heavy. "Henry, what would you do? Would you turn her in, or would you protect her, even after what she's done?" No answer came, only the creak of the house settling around me. The next morning, a knock rattled the front door. Sheriff Miller stood there, his hat in hand. He stepped inside, his boots leaving faint traces of dirt on the rug. "Margaret," he said, "I wanted to check on you, and to let you know we're moving forward." My stomach twisted. What does that mean exactly? He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. Daniel's words at the bar, the inconsistencies in Linda's statements, and Helen's testimony they're building a case. I'll be honest, though. It's still fragile. Linda is careful. She hasn't left much we can hold against her directly. I gripped the arm of the chair, my knuckles white. So she could still walk free? Possibly, he admitted, unless we find something more concrete. Financial records, recordings, a confession. The thought of my daughter confessing seemed impossible. Linda would cling to her lies until the bitter end. Yet the sheriff's words planted a seed in my mind. Perhaps she could be caught off guard. That evening, Helen and I shared stew at the kitchen table. She spoke quietly, her eyes fixed on me. "Margaret, you don't have to carry this burden alone. If Linda comes here, if she threatens you again, you call me, or you call the sheriff. Do you understand?" I nodded, though a part of me doubted I would have the strength to do so. She was my daughter. Even now, with everything she had done, part of me longed to shield her. But Linda was already unraveling. The sheriff told me later that she and Daniel had been seen arguing outside a gas station. Witnesses described shouting, Daniel waving his arms, Linda covering her face in frustration. Their alliance, once strong, was cracking under the pressure. One night, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. My heart pounded as I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer out. A shadow lingered near the porch, unmoving. The shape was familiar, too familiar. "Linda," I whispered to myself. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the darkness, listening until the footsteps faded into the night. Fear clung to me like a shroud, but beneath it, anger burned. Why come in the shadows, unless guilt weighed on her? The next day, I told the sheriff. His face hardened. "She's testing you, Margaret. Don't let her. If she comes again, we'll be ready." Helen suggested I stay at her place, but I refused. "This is my home. I won't be driven out of it." And so I remained, even as the silence grew heavy, even as every creak of the floorboards made me wonder if Linda had returned. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the living room, I found myself holding one of Linda's old dresses. It was pale yellow, stitched by my own hands decades ago. She had worn it to her high school graduation, her smile wide, her future bright. I pressed the fabric to my face, inhaling the faint scent of lavender that still lingered. Tears blurred my vision. How had we come to this? How had love turned to betrayal, trust to fear? That evening, the phone rang. It was Sheriff Miller. His voice was low, urgent. "Margaret, we've learned something new. Daniel's debts are deeper than we thought. He owes money to people you don't want to cross. If Linda promised them the insurance payout, she may have more to lose than just her freedom. She may be desperate enough to try again." My hand shook as I held the receiver. "You mean, she could come after me again?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "We'll keep watch, but you need to be careful, very careful." After I hung up, I sat in the silence, the yellow dress still on my lap. My heart ached with love for my daughter, but fear shadowed it now, heavy and sharp. The fight wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. Nights in my little house had never felt so long. Every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of wind through the chimes outside sent my heart racing. I kept a lamp burning in the living room, a small circle of light against the shadows. Helen insisted I sleep at her house, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was my home, the place my husband and I had built together. If I abandoned it, I felt I would abandon the last piece of him too. Still, I couldn't shake the fear that Linda would come again. The image of her shadow lingering near the porch haunted me. What did she want that night? Was it guilt that kept her away from the door, or hesitation to finish what she had started? Sheriff Miller checked in often, his patrol car sometimes idling outside my house at odd hours. "Just keeping watch," he would say when I peeked out. His presence was a comfort, though I knew he couldn't guard me forever. One afternoon, he sat with me in the kitchen, sipping the coffee Helen had brewed. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes were sharp. "We've been digging deeper into Daniel," he said. "He owes money to some dangerous men out of Charlotte. If Linda promised them a payout from your policy, they'll want answers. That makes her cornered and dangerous." I swallowed hard. "You think she'll come back here?" He didn't answer directly, but the silence was enough. That evening, I locked every window and door, something I had never done in all my years in Asheville. Fear gnawed at me, but alongside it, something else stirred a stubborn defiance. I had survived once already. I would not be so easily taken again. Meanwhile, Linda's life was unraveling. I heard whispers around town, carried by neighbors and store clerks. She was seen arguing with Daniel in public, her voice raised, her hands trembling. He, on the other hand, looked like a man unraveling from within, stumbling drunk, shouting at anyone who would listen about debts and betrayal. Helen came by with fresh bread one afternoon, her brow furrowed. I ran into Linda today. She looked terrible, eyes sunken, hair a mess. She said you were confused, that the fall scrambled your mind. She's trying to paint you as unstable. The words cut deep, though I had expected them. She wants to discredit me before I can stand in front of a jury, I said quietly. Helen reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Don't let her. You know the truth, and so does God. Oh. That night, I prayed longer than usual, kneeling beside my bed despite the ache in my knees. I asked for strength, for clarity, for protection, not just for me, but for Linda too. Somewhere deep down, I still wanted redemption for her. But redemption required repentance, and I wasn't sure she had it in her. A few days later, the sheriff returned with news. Daniel cracked, he said, setting his hat on the table. Not completely, but enough. During questioning, he admitted he knew about your insurance. He claims it was Linda's idea, though not his. He's trying to shift the blame. My breath caught. And Linda? She denies everything. Says Daniel is a liar, trying to drag her down with him. I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing heavy. Each pointed the finger at the other, but I knew in my bones they were both guilty. The difference was that one was my daughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room, my hand brushing the edge of the mantel where my husband's photograph rested. His calm eyes seemed to meet mine, as if asking me to hold fast. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps outside. My blood turned to ice. I peered through the curtain, my heart thundering. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, just beyond the pool of lamplight. Linda, I whispered, though I couldn't see her face clearly. The figure lingered for a long moment, unmoving. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the night. I sank into a chair, trembling. Fear coiled in my stomach, but so did anger. How long would this cat-and-mouse game continue? How long until she struck again, or until I gathered the courage to face her head-on? The next morning, I told Sheriff Miller. His expression hardened. She's circling you, Margaret, testing your resolve. We need to set a trap, or this will never end. A trap. The word chilled me, yet also filled me with a strange sense of relief. I was tired of waiting, tired of being hunted in my own home. If this had to end, let it end, with truth laid bare for all to see. I didn't yet know how or when, but I knew one thing. I was ready. The first frost of the season lay across Asheville like a silver veil, glittering on rooftops and lawns as the sun rose. I stood at my window, wrapped in a shawl, watching my breath fog against the glass. My little house felt colder than ever, the walls thin against the storm of fear and betrayal that circled me. When Sheriff Miller came that morning, his coat buttoned tight, his expression was grave. He set his hat on the table and leaned forward. Margaret, we can't let this drag on. Linda keeps circling your home, testing you. That's dangerous. I think it's time we turn the tables. My hands tightened around my teacup. What do you mean? A trap, he said simply. We'll give her the chance to reveal herself, to say or do something she can't take back. But it has to come from you. The thought made my stomach twist. You want me to lure her in? His eyes softened. I know it's asking a lot, but she trusts you more than anyone else. If she believes you're wavering, she might let her guard down. I sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down. My daughter, the little girl I had once carried in my arms, was now someone I had to trick into showing her true face. It felt unnatural, wrong, and yet, hadn't she already betrayed me in the cruelest way? Helen arrived that afternoon, her arms full of groceries, her cheeks pink from the cold. When I told her of the sheriff's plan, she set down the bags with a sharp thud. It's risky, she said, but maybe it's the only way. Margaret, you can't live like this, always waiting, always afraid. And she was right. I had survived the fall, survived the long nights of fear, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. I needed to reclaim my life. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper, my hand trembling as I wrote a note. The words were simple, deliberate. Linda, I want to talk. I don't want this hanging over us. Come by tomorrow night, alone. The next day, I left the note in a place I knew she would find it slipped into her mailbox, while Helen kept watch from her car. We drove away quickly, my heart pounding as though I'd just committed a crime. The waiting was the hardest part. Every tick of the clock seemed louder, every shadow in the house deeper. Sheriff Miller had placed discreet recording devices in the living room and hidden deputies nearby. But even knowing I wasn't alone, fear clung to me like a second skin. When night fell, I lit a single lamp and sat in my armchair, the yellow dress of Linda's youth folded neatly on my lap. It was my reminder of who she had been, and of the child I still longed to save. The knock came just after 8. Slow, deliberate. My pulse raced as I rose to answer. Linda stood on the porch, her coat pulled tight, her eyes scanning the yard nervously before settling on me. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Mom," she said, her voice strained. "You wanted to talk?" I nodded, guiding her to the living room. She sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking of the clock. "I don't want to fight anymore," I said softly. "You're my daughter. I want to believe there's still good in you, but you have to be honest with me. Did you push me?" Her eyes flickered, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Mom, I told you it was an accident. You slipped." I leaned forward, my voice steady but quiet. "I didn't slip, Linda. I felt your hand." Her face hardened, her mask cracking. "And what if you did? What if I lost control for just a second? Do you have any idea what I'm dealing with? The debts, the threats? Daniel said the insurance would solve everything. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. But I didn't see another way." The words spilled out, raw and desperate. My breath caught, tears stinging my eyes. For all the pain they caused, they were the truth I had been waiting for. Before I could speak, the front door swung open and Sheriff Miller stepped in, his deputies close behind. Linda's face went pale as she realized what had happened. "Linda Turner," the sheriff said firmly, "you need to come with us." She leapt to her feet, her voice sharp with betrayal. "You set me up. You—" She turned to me, her eyes burning. "You did this, Mom. You chose them over me." My heart cracked at her words, but I forced myself to stand tall. "I chose the truth, Linda, because the lies were killing us both." The deputies led her out, her protests echoing into the night. When the door closed behind them, the house felt unbearably quiet. I sank back into my chair, the yellow dress still on my lap, tears spilling freely. I had my daughter's confession, but the victory tasted of ash. The night Linda was taken from my house, I didn't sleep. I sat in the same chair until the lamp sputtered and died, staring at the empty space where she had stood, her face twisted in anger and betrayal. The silence that followed her arrest was heavier than any scream. Helen came by at dawn, her arms wrapped around me before I could speak. "You did what you had to, Margaret. You're alive because you found the courage to face her." Her words were kind, but they couldn't soothe the ache inside me. My daughter was behind bars. No matter the reasons, no matter the truth she had admitted, the image of her being led away in handcuffs haunted me. I had birthed her, raised her, loved her through every mistake. Now, I had also condemned her. Sheriff Miller stopped by later that morning, his hat in his hands, his eyes steady. "Linda's been booked," he said. "She confessed enough in that room to support charges of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Daniel, of course, is already trying to cut a deal, throwing her under the bus at every turn." I winced. "They'll tear each other apart." "That's what happens when loyalty is built on lies," he said quietly. "Daniel's talking, but he's slippery. He paints himself as the victim, says Linda planned everything. The prosecution will sort it out, but make no mistake, he's just as guilty." I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap. The path forward was clear now. Trials, hearings, testimony. My name, my family, my pain would be laid bare in a courtroom for strangers to weigh and measure. That evening, I wandered through my home, touching the familiar things that anchored me to a simpler time. The quilt on the couch, stitched by my mother's hands. The rocking chair Henry once sat in to read the newspaper. Linda's childhood drawings still pinned to the corkboard in the hallway. My house was a museum of love, and yet its stories had been twisted by betrayal. A knock at the door startled me. It was one of the deputies, his breath clouding in the cold night air. "Mrs. Turner," he said. "Daniel Hayes posted bail. He's out." Fear clenched my chest. "Out? Already?" "Yes, ma'am. But don't worry, we'll keep an eye on things." After he left, I locked the doors twice over and drew the curtains tight, but dread gnawed at me. Daniel was reckless, desperate, and now unbound. What might he do, knowing Linda had confessed and that I had been the one to expose them both? The following day, Helen drove me into town for groceries. Whispers followed me through the aisles. People had read the headlines, had seen Linda's face on the news. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment. How could a daughter do such a thing? I overheard one woman murmur. The words cut me, though they weren't wrong. Back home, as we unpacked the bags, Helen spoke softly. "Margaret, you can't carry their shame. What Linda did, what Daniel did, that belongs to them, not to you." I nodded, but the guilt was heavy. Parents always wonder what they might have done differently, what signs they missed, what lessons they failed to teach. The question burned in me. Had I loved Linda too much, too blindly, or not enough? 2 nights later, as the wind howled through the mountains, the sheriff returned with news. His expression was grim. "Daniel's been making noise," he said. "He's telling anyone who'll listen that you tricked Linda, that you forced her confession. He's dangerous, Margaret. I want you to stay vigilant. Don't go out alone." I clutched the edge of the table. "Do you think he'll come here?" "I wouldn't put it past him," he admitted. "Men like Daniel, when they're cornered, they lash out." That night, I sat by the window, the yellow dress still folded on my lap. It had become a strange comfort, a reminder of a time before everything had unraveled. I whispered into the darkness, "Lord, give me the strength to face what comes." And what came was not peace, but deeper shadows. 3 days later, Helen rushed into my house, breathless. "Margaret," she said, "Daniel's been seen near your street. My neighbor spotted him by the gas station last night, pacing, looking angry." Fear returned, sharp and cold, but along with it came something unexpected. Resolve. I had faced the mountain and survived. I had faced my daughter and stood firm. I would not let Daniel Hayes take the rest of my life. I sat with Helen that night, the two of us sipping tea by the fire. The crackle of the flames filled the silence between us. Finally, I said, "This isn't just about justice anymore. It's about survival. He wants to scare me, maybe even silence me. But I won't hide." Helen nodded, her eyes fierce. "Then we'll stand together. You're not alone, Margaret. Not now, not ever." The weight of justice pressed heavy on me, but for the first time, I felt something like hope. The storm was still raging, but I was no longer the woman clinging to a root on the edge of a cliff. I was stronger now, forged in betrayal and fire, and I would face whatever came next. The wind rattled the windows that night, like an unwelcome hand knocking against the glass. I sat in my armchair, a blanket over my knees, the Bible resting on the small table beside me. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting it to burst open. Daniel Hayes was free. That truth weighed on me heavier than the broken bones that still ached in my body. He was a man with nothing to lose, and men like that are the most dangerous kind. Helen stayed over that night, insisting she wouldn't leave me alone. "If he tries anything, he'll have to go through both of us," she said firmly, though her voice wavered with fear. She slept on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her, her purse within reach. Sometime after midnight, a sound jolted me awake. The faint crunch of gravel outside, the creak of the porch steps. My heart thundered as I reached for the lamp, but I froze when I heard the whisper of a voice. "Margaret." It was low, mocking, slurred by drink. Helen stirred, her eyes wide. "Did you hear?" Before she could finish, a heavy knock rattled the door. "Open up, old woman," Daniel's voice snarled. "You think you can ruin me? You think you can take everything from me?" Helen clutched my hand, her face pale. I shook my head, whispering, "Stay quiet." The pounding grew louder, the door trembling in its frame. Then, sudden silence. We held our breath, waiting, listening. Through the thin curtains, I saw his shadow pass the window, pacing like a wolf circling prey. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the sheriff's number. The line rang twice before his steady voice answered. "Miller. Robert," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He's here. Daniel's outside. Stay calm, Margaret. Don't open the door. Deputies are on their way." Minutes felt like hours. Daniel's footsteps moved around the house, his voice drifting through the walls. "You think you're safe, huh? You think the law can protect you? Linda loved you, and you betrayed her. You'll pay for that. You'll pay." Helen clung to me, whispering prayers under her breath. My hands trembled, but deep inside, a strange calm began to grow. I had faced death once already. If it came again, I would not meet it cowering. Red and blue lights finally flared through the curtains, washing the room in their glow. Sirens cut through the night as deputies stormed the yard. Daniel cursed, his footsteps pounding away into the darkness. The sheriff himself stepped inside moments later, his face grim. "He's gone, but we'll find him. I swear it." Helen collapsed into a chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He was right there, Robert, right outside the door." Miller nodded. "And that means he's desperate. He's slipping. That's when men like him make mistakes." I looked down at my trembling hands, then back at the sheriff. "I'm tired of waiting, Robert. I can't keep living in fear of when he'll come back. What can we do?" He hesitated, then spoke firmly. "We use this against him. Tonight," he showed his hand. "We'll put out a warrant, tighten the net, and if he comes back, we'll be ready." When the deputies left, silence settled over the house again. Helen insisted on staying, and though I told her she should rest, I was grateful she refused to go. We sat together in the dim glow of the lamp, too shaken to sleep. At dawn, I stepped onto the porch, the frost crunching beneath my slippers. The world looked peaceful again, as though the night before had been a bad dream. But the splintered wood around the doorframe told another story. Daniel Hayes had been at my door, and he would not stop until he was caught or until something worse happened. Later that morning, the sheriff returned with updates. "We've put out the warrant. His face will be on every patrol car, every bulletin board. We'll find him." I nodded, though doubt lingered in my heart. Men like Daniel had a way of slipping through cracks, surviving on desperation and cunning. But I also knew something else. He had crossed a line. He had threatened me in my own home. And that, I prayed, would be his undoing. That evening, as Helen prepared supper, I sat quietly, turning the yellow dress over in my lap once more. Linda's betrayal still cut deeper than anything Daniel could ever do. But Daniel was the wolf at the door, the one who had whispered poison into her ear, the one who had driven her down the path that led her to me on that overlook. And I vowed then that I would see him face justice not just for me, but for the daughter he had corrupted. The town of Asheville seemed quieter in those days, though I knew it was only the illusion of peace. In truth, people were whispering more than ever. Daniel Hayes had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of anger and fear. His name appeared on posters at gas stations, at the post office, even at the church bulletin board. The sheriff assured me it was only a matter of time before they caught him. Still, every night I jumped at the sound of branches against the window, half believing he was out there watching. Linda, meanwhile, sat in the county jail. The sheriff told me she was struggling, her temper flaring one moment, her tears flowing the next. "She's not the hardened type, Margaret," he said. "Jail wears on her. If she keeps unraveling, she may talk more, maybe even tell us everything." The thought gave me little comfort. To know she was breaking down behind bars was its own kind of pain. I pictured her in a cold cell, her head buried in her hands, and the mother in me longed to reach out, to soothe her as I once did when nightmares woke her in the night. But I also knew that her choices had put her there, and my own choices had helped keep her there. Helen visited often, bringing casseroles and stories of the neighbors. She tried to keep my mind from sinking too deep into guilt. One evening, as we sat with tea by the fire, she said, "You've carried the weight of Linda's sins long enough, Margaret. She's an adult. What she did was her decision, not yours." I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. Mothers always blame themselves, don't they? Had I been too soft, too forgiving all those years? Or had I somehow failed to love her enough? A week after Daniel disappeared, the sheriff came to my house again, his expression heavy. We found his car abandoned near the state line. Empty. No sign of him. Fear prickled my skin. So he could be anywhere? Anywhere, Miller admitted. But he's desperate, Margaret, and desperate men make mistakes. That's when we'll get him. That night, I prayed longer than ever. I prayed for Daniel to be caught, for Linda to find remorse, for my own strength not to fail me. And as I prayed, I felt a strange clarity. This ordeal wasn't just about punishment, it was about truth. Truth for me, for Linda, even for the man who had poisoned her heart. 2 days later, the sheriff called with unexpected news. "Linda wants to see you," he said. My breath caught. "See me? In jail?" "She's been asking for you," he said gently. "I think she needs to talk." Fear and longing tangled in my chest. Part of me dreaded facing her, seeing her in that place. But another part longed to hear her voice without the bitterness, without the lies. Helen offered to drive me. The county jail was a squat, gray building on the edge of town, its walls cold and unwelcoming. As I walked through the metal detector and down the long hallway, my legs felt weak. They brought Linda into the visitation room, her orange jumpsuit stark against her pale skin. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back harshly, her eyes rimmed with red. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at me, her lips trembling. "Mom," she whispered finally, her voice cracking. "Why did you do it? Why did you turn me in?" The question pierced my heart. I reached across the table, though the glass divider separated us. "Because you tried to take my life, Linda. Because the truth couldn't stay buried." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. Daniel kept saying it was the only way. I thought if I just did it, all the pressure would stop. I was so tired, Mom. So scared." My throat tightened. For the first time, I saw not the cold, calculating woman from the Overlook, but my frightened child again. "Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you come back when I was hanging there?" Her sobs shook her shoulders. "Because if I pulled you back up, Daniel would have known I couldn't go through with it. He would have left me. I thought I needed him." My heart broke at her words. She had chosen him over me. Yes, but beneath it all, she was still lost, still searching for someone to hold on to. The guard tapped the glass, signaling our time was up. Linda pressed her hands against the divider, her eyes pleading. "Mom, please, don't let them keep me here forever." I placed my hand against the glass opposite hers. "I'll tell the truth, Linda. That's all I can do. The rest is up to you." As I left the jail, Helen squeezed my arm gently. "She's cracking, Margaret. Maybe she'll finally tell the whole story." I nodded, though my chest ached with sorrow. Breaking points reveal who we truly are. I had survived mine. Now, it was Linda's turn. And somewhere out there, Daniel's breaking point was coming too. The winter air grew sharper with each passing day. Frost clung to the windows every morning, and the mountains beyond Asheville wore a crown of snow. But inside my home, the chill came from fear more than weather. Daniel Hayes was still out there, a wolf with nowhere to go, and every night I half expected him to emerge from the darkness. Sheriff Miller tried to reassure me. "He's running out of places to hide," he said, standing on my porch one afternoon. His breath fogged in the cold. "Men like him can't stay quiet for long. They need money, food, attention, and the moment he makes a move, we'll be there." But his words didn't soothe me. I knew Daniel was desperate, and desperation made a man reckless. Helen stayed close, often sleeping in my guest room. Her presence was a comfort, her steady hands grounding me when fear threatened to overtake me. "He won't win, Margaret," she said firmly as we shared tea one night. "You've come too far, you're stronger than him." Still, my dreams were haunted. I saw Daniel's shadow circling my house, heard his voice sneering through the walls. More than once, I woke gasping, convinced he had broken in. Meanwhile, Linda was unraveling in jail. The sheriff told me she had begun to talk more during questioning, her words tumbling out in fragments. She spoke of debts, of Daniel's anger, of nights filled with shouting and threats. "She paints herself as his victim," Miller said, his eyes sharp. "But she admits enough to prove she went along willingly." I thought of her hands pressed against the glass during our visit, her tears staining her face. She was guilty, yes, but she was also trapped in a web spun by Daniel's lies. One evening, as Helen and I were cleaning up after supper, There was a knock at the door. My heart lurched, but when I opened it, I found one of the deputies standing there. His face pale. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "a hunter spotted someone in the woods near the Blue Ridge Parkway this morning. He swears it was Daniel Hayes. He had a campfire, some supplies. We're sending search teams, but—" He hesitated. "He was heading this way." The words hit like a stone in my chest. "Heading this way. Toward me." Helen gasped, gripping my arm. "He's coming back, Margaret. You can't stay here alone." But I shook my head. "I won't run from him. This is my home." That night, the deputies increased their patrols, their flashlights sweeping across my yard. I sat by the window, watching the beams move through the dark, listening to the crunch of boots on frost. Yet no matter how many men guarded me, fear still pressed in from the shadows. The next morning, I found something chilling. On the porch rail, carved roughly into the wood, were 3 words: "You betrayed us." Helen's face went white when she saw it. "He was here, Margaret. Right here." The sheriff arrived within the hour, his jaw tight. "He's taunting you," Miller said, "trying to scare you into silence, but it also means he's sloppy. We'll catch him." I touched the carving with trembling fingers. The words weren't just a threat, they were a message. Daniel still believed Linda was loyal to him, still believed I was the enemy. He didn't know she was already unraveling, already speaking truths in her cell. Later that week, I visited Linda again. Her eyes were hollow, her shoulders slumped. She looked older, worn down by the weight of confinement. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He won't stop. Daniel. If they don't catch him, he'll come for you. I know him. He's dangerous." Tears stung my eyes. "Then why did you follow him, Linda? Why did you let him drag you into this darkness?" She shook her head, sobbing. "Because I thought I needed him. Because he made me believe I was nothing without him. But I see it now. He doesn't love me. He never did. He only wanted the money." Her words were a confession, raw and painful. For the first time, I believed she truly saw the truth. The guard signaled the end of our visit, but before she was led away, Linda pressed her hand against the glass. "Be careful, Mom. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Driving back with Helen, the mountains loomed dark and cold against the evening sky. I clutched the Bible in my lap, whispering a prayer, not just for protection, but for the strength to face what I knew was coming. Daniel Hayes was in the woods, circling closer. And soon, our paths would meet again. The days after the carving on my porch stretched long and tense. Deputies patrolled the street, their headlights sweeping the dark, but I could feel Daniel out there like a wolf pacing just beyond the tree line. Every sound set me on edge. The snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl, even the whistle of the wind. Sheriff Miller came by one morning, his coat dusted with frost. He set his hat on the table and leaned forward, his voice low. "Margaret, it's only a matter of time. We've tracked Daniel's movements. He's been living rough in the woods, stealing food, staying just ahead of us. But he's getting careless. He's tired, hungry, desperate." I clasped my hands in my lap. "And desperate men are dangerous." He nodded. "That's why we're going to end this. We're setting a trap tomorrow night. A decoy, bait he won't resist. But I need you to be ready, Margaret. If he comes to this house again, don't open the door. Don't speak to him. Just stay safe until we move in." End of 12. Helen, sitting across from us, crossed her arms tightly. "You're not leaving her alone, Robert, not for a second." "I won't," he promised. "We'll be watching." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with the lamp low, watching the yard. The carving on the porch rail still glared back at me, a cruel reminder of how close he had come. I thought of Linda in her cell, her eyes hollow with regret. She had warned me, "He won't stop." The next day passed in silence. Helen stayed with me, her presence steady, her hands busy with knitting, though her eyes often flicked to the window. As the sun set and the frost crept back across the ground, Sheriff Miller returned with 2 deputies. "We're stationed nearby," he said. "If Daniel shows, we'll move in fast. Margaret, keep the lights low. Act as if you're alone. He'll come if he thinks you're vulnerable." My stomach churned at the thought of being used as bait, but I understood. This was the only way to end it. The hours dragged. Helen and I sat in the dim glow of the fireplace, the only sound the crackle of wood. Midnight came and went. My eyelids grew heavy, but fear kept me awake. Then a sound, the faint crunch of footsteps on the frost outside. Helen's hand clutched mine, her knitting falling to the floor. Through the thin curtain, I saw movement, a shadow slipping along the porch. My heart thundered as the doorknob rattled. Margaret. The voice was low, taunting, soaked in malice. Open the door, you can't hide forever. I stayed silent, my breath shallow. The knob rattled harder, then the pounding began. You betrayed her! You betrayed me! Helen squeezed my hand, whispering, Hold on. They're out there. The pounding grew furious, then stopped. Silence pressed heavy against the walls. I dared a glance through the curtain. Daniel's shadow moved away from the porch, toward the side of the house. Suddenly, the back window shattered. Glass rained onto the kitchen floor. Helen gasped. I stumbled back as Daniel's figure climbed through, his eyes wild, his clothes torn from the woods. There you are, he snarled, his voice ragged. You think you can ruin my life? You think you can take everything from me? I froze, fear rooting me in place. Helen cried out, but before Daniel could lunge forward, the front door burst open. Sheriff's Department? Drop it, Hayes. M. Red and blue lights flared against the walls as deputies stormed in. Daniel spun, cursing, his hands raised as if ready to strike. But he was outnumbered, outmatched, his strength spent. With a furious roar, he lunged toward me. I stumbled back, bracing for impact, but Sheriff Miller tackled him hard to the floor. The deputies swarmed, pinning him down, cuffing his wrists as he spat curses and threats. The house rang with chaos, boots pounding, radios crackling, and then, just as quickly, silence returned. Daniel lay bound on the floor, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with hatred. Sheriff Miller hauled him to his feet, his voice steady. It's over, Hayes. Daniel sneered at me as they dragged him out. This isn't over, old woman. You'll pay for this. You and your precious daughter both. But his words no longer pierced me. He was caught. The wolf at my door had been dragged into the light. When the deputies left with him, the house was quiet again, save for the crunch of frost under their boots. Helen collapsed into a chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. Lord, have mercy, she whispered. I thought we'd lost you. I sank beside her, tears spilling freely. It's over, I whispered. At least for now. But even as relief washed through me, I knew the fight wasn't done. Daniel Hayes was caught, but Linda still faced her reckoning, and so did I. Winter settled deep over Asheville by the time the hearings began. Snow clung stubbornly to the mountains, the air sharp with the bite of January. I pulled my wool coat tighter as Helen and I walked up the courthouse steps, each one heavier than the last. Inside those walls, I would have to relive everything: the fall, the betrayal, the nights of fear. And worse, I would have to do it in front of my daughter. The courtroom was crowded. Reporters clustered in the back, townsfolk filling the benches. Whispers buzzed like bees, but they fell silent when the bailiff called the court to order. I sat near the front, my heart pounding as Linda was led in, dressed in prison orange. She looked thinner, paler, her eyes darting nervously around the room until they found mine. For a moment, her expression softened, like a child reaching for her mother. But then it hardened again, the mask slipping back into place. Daniel was brought in next, shackled, his face twisted in a sneer. He scanned the room with defiance, muttering under his breath as deputies seated him beside his attorney. His presence made my skin crawl, yet I felt no fear now, only pity for the wreck of a man who had poisoned so many lives. The prosecutor laid out the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, assault. The words felt heavy, echoing in my chest. When the judge called me to the stand, my knees trembled as I rose, clutching the Bible in my hands as I swore the oath. The prosecutor's questions were gentle, guiding me through my story. I spoke of the life insurance policy, of Linda's growing desperation, of the day on the mountain when her hand pressed against my back. My voice cracked at times, tears welling as I described the fall, the route that saved me, the look in my daughter's eyes as she turned away. The courtroom was silent, every word hanging in the air like frost. Then came the defense. Linda's lawyer rose, a sharp-eyed man with a polished voice. "Mrs. Turner," he said smoothly, "you suffered a traumatic fall, did you not? A concussion, broken ribs?" "Yes," I answered softly. "And trauma can cause confusion, can it not? Memories blurred, perceptions distorted." I lifted my chin. "I know what I felt. I know who pushed me." His eyes narrowed. "But you admit you were clinging to a root, half-conscious in pain. Isn't it possible, just possible, that you slipped, and your mind filled in the rest?" The question twisted like a knife. I felt the jury's eyes on me, weighing my words. But then I remembered the weight of Linda's hand, the coldness in her eyes, the way she walked away. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't slip. My daughter pushed me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Linda's face crumpled, her lips trembling, her eyes filling with tears. The defense turned to Daniel's case next, but his own lawyer struggled. The prosecutor presented witnesses. Bar patrons who heard him bragging about an insurance payday, neighbors who saw him and Linda arguing about money, deputies who had found him breaking into my home. Each piece was another chain binding him tighter. When Linda was finally called to testify, the air in the courtroom grew taut. She walked to the stand, her shoulders slumped, her hands shaking as she swore the oath. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she answered the questions. At first, she tried to deflect blame onto Daniel. "He made me believe it was the only way," she said, her voice cracking. "He told me if I didn't do it, we'd both be ruined." But under cross-examination, her mask cracked. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the prosecutor pressed her. "Did you push your mother, Linda?" Silence stretched. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, with a sob, she whispered, "Yes, but I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to." Gasps rippled through the room. My own breath caught, my heart breaking anew. I had waited for truth, but hearing it aloud was a wound deeper than any before. The judge called for order as Linda wept openly, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, she looked at me, her eyes filled with despair. And though my soul ached, I nodded gently, as if to say, "I still see you. You are still my daughter." The trial dragged on for days, evidence and testimonies piling higher. When the closing arguments were given, the prosecutor spoke of greed, betrayal, and the sanctity of family bonds broken by lies. Daniel's lawyer raged about lack of proof, but his words rang hollow. Linda's attorney pleaded for mercy, painting her as a victim of manipulation. The jury left to deliberate, and I sat in silence, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Whatever their decision, nothing could erase what had happened. But perhaps, at last, the truth would set us free. When the jury returned, the foreman rose, his voice steady. "We find Daniel Hayes guilty on all counts." Daniel snarled, slamming his fists on the table as deputies restrained him. "And for Linda Turner," the foreman continued, "we find her guilty of attempted manslaughter and conspiracy to commit fraud, with recommendation for leniency due to coercion." Linda gasped, her hands flying to her face. The judge called for order as the verdict sank in. Daniel would face decades in prison. Linda too would be sentenced, though with hope for a lighter term. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I sat frozen, tears spilling silently down my cheeks. Justice had been served, yet my heart ached with the weight of it. Helen took my hand gently. "It's over, Margaret," she whispered. "It's finally over." But as I looked at Linda, sobbing as deputies led her away, I knew it wasn't truly over. The scars of betrayal, the ache of love twisted by desperation, they would linger in me forever. Still, for the first time, I felt a sliver of peace. The truth had been spoken, and perhaps in time, healing could begin. The courthouse emptied slowly that day, the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls until only silence remained. Helen and I walked out together, the cold, January air sharp against my face. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, soft and fragile, as if the world itself wished to cover the scars left behind. Justice had been served. Daniel Hayes was gone, swallowed by a sentence that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his days. Linda, my Linda, would serve her own time. Lighter, yes, but still heavy enough to mark her forever. As we stepped onto the courthouse steps, Helen squeezed my hand. "It's over now, Margaret. You can rest." I nodded, though in my heart I knew it was not so simple. Justice ends in courtrooms. But love and loss, they linger far longer. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to its rhythms. I swept the porch, baked bread, stitched quilts. Helen remained my constant companion, her laughter and steady hands reminding me that friendship is often the family we choose. Sheriff Miller visited now and then, checking in, though his work had shifted to new cases, new storms in our little town. But at night, when the fire burned low and shadows stretched long, I thought of Linda. I imagined her in her cell, staring at the ceiling as I often did, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Sometimes I held the yellow dress she had worn to graduation, pressing it to my cheek as though it could bring her back to me, not the woman who betrayed me, but the girl who once ran barefoot through our yard, her laughter bright as sunlight. I visited her once after the trial. The guard led me to the same glass divider, the same cold room where we had spoken before. Linda sat waiting, her shoulders slumped, her eyes tired but softer now. When she saw me, she smiled faintly, though it trembled. "Mom," she whispered. I pressed my hand to the glass. "Linda." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I'm sorry, truly. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I needed you to hear me say it." Tears blurred my vision. "I already forgave you, child, long before today. But forgiveness doesn't erase the truth. It only helps us carry it." She nodded, her eyes shining. "I'll try to do better, to be better, even in here." Esther. When the guard called time, I rose slowly, my hand lingering on the glass. "I'll pray for you, Linda, every day." Walking out of the jail, I felt lighter somehow. The wound was still there, but it had begun to heal. As winter turned toward spring, I found peace in small things. The warmth of the sun on my face, the chirping of birds returning to the trees, the smell of fresh earth as gardens stirred back to life. Each moment reminded me that life, no matter how broken, has a way of beginning again. One Sunday morning, I sat in church as the choir sang, their voices rising like sunlight through stained glass. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. The words of Scripture echoed in my heart. "The truth shall set you free." I thought of the mountain, of the fall, of the root that had saved me. I thought of the nights of fear, the courtroom, the confession, and I thought of the strength I had never known I carried until I was forced to find it. I was not just a victim, I was a survivor. And though my daughter's choices had cut me to the core, my love for her remained, bruised, battered, but unbroken, because that is what mothers do. We love, even when it hurts. As I walked out of the church that morning, sunlight glinted off the last patches of melting snow. The air carried the faintest promise of spring. I breathed deeply, letting it fill me. My story was not over. There would be more lonely nights, more prayers whispered into the dark. But there would also be mornings like this, bright with hope. And as long as I had breath, I would keep telling myself the truth, that even in betrayal, even in pain, love endures. Always. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter a new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving, and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.